It was a grey morning, the kind where the sea mist hangs so low it feels like the sky is leaning against the roof. I opened my front door, still holding my cup of coffee, expecting only the quiet sound of gulls and the damp air that always clings to the harbour. Instead, I saw an envelope, plain, unmarked, resting on the porch boards as if it had grown there overnight. For a long moment, I just stared at it. No return address. Only my full name written across the front, Margaret Holloway. My hand trembled as I bent to pick it up. The paper was heavier than it looked, the kind used for formal letters, wills, contracts, things that carry weight. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a notice from the council, maybe something the mailman had dropped by mistake. But the truth pressed harder with each step back into the house. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling above it, and I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. Perhaps the courage to open it, perhaps the illusion that if I let it sit long enough, it might disappear. But silence has its own kind of push. Eventually I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Just one. The words on it were short, sharp, and impossible to misread. They are planning to sell your house. You are not supposed to know. That was it. No signature, no explanation, just that single blow. My breath caught so sharply I had to set the paper down. My house, the place where I had lived for more than 30 years, where every wall carried Donald's laughter, where every picture frame still held a piece of the life we built. To imagine it being sold without me, without even a word, it was unthinkable. And yet there it was, written as plain as the black ink on the page. I sat down hard on the chair, both hands pressed flat against the table. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't notice. All I could hear was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the rushing in my ears. Who had written it? Who wanted me to know? Or worse, who wanted me to doubt? My eyes returned again and again to that one line, the cruelty of its certainty. I should have thrown it away. I should have told myself it was nonsense. But I didn't. I folded it carefully, smoothed the crease with my palm, and placed it back into the envelope. I kept it right there on the table in front of me, like a stone I couldn't lift. And in that moment, though I couldn't yet explain why, I knew my life was about to change. When I turned 55, I told myself that life would finally settle. The storm of raising children, the restless energy of youth, even the aching years after Donald passed. They were behind me. What remained was quiet, predictable, a rhythm I could trust. In our small coastal town, days have a way of blending together, each one softened by the cry of the gulls and the steady breath of the tide. I thought I knew what to expect, and I thought I had made peace with it. My mornings usually began the same. A cup of coffee at the kitchen table, the harbour just visible through the window. I would watch the fishermen pull their boats away from the dock, their voices carrying across the water. Afterward, I'd walk to the market, exchange small talk with the same vendors I had known for decades. Sometimes I'd stop at the library, the place that had once been my work and had now become my retreat. I liked the order of the shelves, the hush of the reading rooms, the smell of old paper and polished wood. Evenings were slower. I cooked simple meals for myself, soup, fresh bread. The fish a neighbour sometimes dropped off when his catch was too large. I read, I wrote small notes in my journal, and I told myself this was enough, that a quiet life was not a lesser life. And in many ways, it was true. I had friends, Ellen next door, who never let me forget when the hydrangeas needed trimming, Patty, who dropped by with fresh rolls and gossip in equal measure. The town itself felt like family, the kind that waved from across the street and remembered which day Donald and I had been married. But family, real family, that was different. Claire, my daughter, had grown into her own world. We spoke less often than I liked, though I clung to the idea that our bond was unshakable, that blood had a way of surviving silences. I believed that when her wedding came, it would be the bridge back to closeness, to laughter, to something whole again. And then came the envelope. That letter, those cruel words about my house, did more than rattle me. It split something open inside me, the routines, the steady habits, the confidence that I knew where I stood. They all felt thinner, like old paint cracking under the weight of years. For the first time in a long while, the quiet I had built no longer felt safe. It felt fragile, as though one gust of wind could scatter it all. And I could not shake the feeling that the gust had already begun. I have lived in this house for more than 3 decades, long enough that the walls feel like they breathe with me. Every step across the floorboards carries a memory. The creak by the stairwell. Donald always meant to fix it but never did. The uneven tile near the back door. Our daughter Claire dropped a skillet there when she was 12. And though we replaced the tile, the corner never sat flush. These imperfections are not flaws to me. They are pieces of a story woven into the bones of this home. Sometimes when I walk the hallway at night, I catch myself pausing in front of the photographs that line the walls. Donald and I on our wedding day, his tie slightly crooked, his smile wider than the horizon. Claire as a child, with sand tangled in her hair, holding up a seashell like it contained the ocean itself. Even the faded photo of our first Christmas in this house, the tree too tall for the ceiling, leaning awkwardly but still perfect to us. Donald used to say that a house is just wood and nails until you fill it with life. And we filled this one. Arguments that stretched late into the night, reconciliations over tea at the kitchen table, the echo of Claire's piano practice drifting through the rooms. I can still hear Donald's laugh in the den, the way he'd lean back in his chair after telling a joke, as if he was more surprised by his own punchline than anyone else. To think of this place without us, emptied, staged, stripped of its history, feels like imagining myself erased. That letter on the table was not just a threat to my property. It was a threat to my memories, to the proof that we had lived and loved here. I ran my fingers along the banister, polished smooth by years of use. My hand rested on the newel post, the one Donald built himself after the old one cracked. He had sanded it carefully, sealing it with a pride that made him beam. "This will outlast me," he had said. I believed him. Now I wonder, will it? I sat down on the edge of the sofa, the letter heavy in my mind. It wasn't only the fear of losing the house, it was the fear of losing the story it carried, the love that still clung to every corner. If Claire and Brian really were planning something behind my back, then it wasn't just betrayal of trust. It was betrayal of the life Donald and I had built brick by brick, laugh by laugh, and that was something I was not sure I could forgive. When Claire was little, she used to run through this house as if the walls themselves were cheering her on. She'd burst through the kitchen door with scraped knees and wild hair, shouting my name as though it were the safest word in the world. I held those moments close, even as she grew older and life pulled her further away. I thought that no matter how much time passed, the bond between mother and daughter would remain unbreakable. But bonds, I've learned, can fray quietly, almost without notice, until one day you reach out for them and find only distance. In the last few years, Claire has drifted. Calls became shorter, then less frequent. Birthdays were acknowledged with polite gifts, but not the laughter we once shared. Holidays passed with excuses about work, travel, or simply being too tired. When we did speak, her tone carried something clipped, as though my words pressed on a bruise I couldn't see. I told myself it was just the age she was at, the busyness of her career, the weight of adulthood. I excused her silences the way mothers often do, by filling them with hope. When she announced her engagement, I thought, this is it. This is the moment that will draw us together again. I pictured us sitting side by side planning her wedding, the way I had once imagined we would. I dreamed of helping her choose flowers, tasting cakes, laughing about seating charts. I even set aside a gift, something I had been saving for years, believing it would show her that I still wanted to support her future, no matter what had passed between us. But the letter changed that picture. Suddenly, her distance was no longer just a product of busy days. It felt deliberate, sharpened by the possibility that she was keeping secrets from me. Could Claire, the child I carried, the woman I raised, truly be plotting something so cold as to sell my home behind my back? I didn't want to believe it. My heart resisted the thought with every beat. Yet the silences, the polite but hollow conversations, the way she sidestepped questions about the engagement party, they all began to rearrange themselves into a pattern I had tried too hard not to see. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope again. My daughter's voice echoed in my mind, distant and practiced, saying she was too busy to call, too tired to visit. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, but the letter whispered otherwise. And for the first time in years, I wondered if the distance between us wasn't an accident at all, but a choice. It was Ellen who planted the seed without realizing it. She and I had been neighbors for as long as I can remember. She has the kind of voice that carries across fences, the kind that can turn a passing hello into a half-hour conversation before you notice the time. That afternoon, I was out by the garden pulling at weeds that never seemed to quit, when Ellen leaned over the hedge with her usual cheerful tone. "Margaret Holloway, you'll never guess who I saw in town yesterday," she began, brushing dirt from her gloves. I smiled, expecting another story about the butcher's new apprentice or the scandal of someone parking in the mayor's space again. But her next words made the air still. "Your Claire was at the cafe on Main Street, with a man I didn't recognize. Handsome fellow, not the one she's supposed to marry." I felt the trowel slip slightly in my hand. "Are you sure it was Claire?" I asked, my voice steady but my stomach tightening. "Oh yes," Ellen said easily, as if she were commenting on the weather. "That girl has your eyes. She looked right at me, though she didn't stop to say hello. They were talking low, leaning close. Looked like serious business, if you ask me." She chuckled, shaking her head. "Maybe it was just work. You know how people read into things. Anyway, I thought I'd mention it." She went back to her roses, leaving me with a heart that beat too hard against my ribs. I stood there, the sunlight suddenly harsher, the weeds forgotten at my feet. Claire? With someone else? I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps it was nothing, a colleague, a friend, a chance meeting. But Ellen was not one to mistake faces. And the way she described it, leaning close, voices lowered, gnawed at me. By the time I went back inside, the walls of the house felt tighter. The letter still sat on the kitchen table, its warning pressing on me like a bruise. First the envelope, now Ellen's words. Each piece on its own might be dismissed, but together they began to form a shadow too large to ignore. I sat by the window, watching the gulls wheel above the harbour. My thoughts circled just as restlessly. Was Claire hiding more from me than I had allowed myself to see? Had the distance between us been covering something far deeper than indifference? The seed had been planted, and though I wanted to brush it away, I could already feel it taking root. The envelope never moved from the table. Morning light, afternoon shadows, lamplight at night. It was always there, waiting. I tried once to slip it into a drawer, to bury it beneath old receipts and unopened mail, but within an hour it was back in front of me, as if my hands had carried it without asking my permission. I could not throw it away, and I could not quite face it either. Each time I unfolded the paper, the words struck with the same force. "They are planning to sell your house. You are not supposed to know." Short, cruel, final. I would read it, fold it carefully along the same crease, and press my palm flat across it as though I could steady the tremor inside me. The strangest thing was how the letter seemed to change depending on the moment. In the morning, it looked like a warning, a chance to protect myself. In the evenings, under the softer light, it became an accusation. Against me, against my blindness, against the love I had clung to for too long. I would sip my coffee, my eyes drifting back to that envelope as if it were another presence in the room. I tried to imagine who had written it. A stranger? Someone from town? Or worse, someone close enough to know but unwilling to say more. The not knowing gnawed at me even more than the words themselves. Sometimes I would push the envelope to the far edge of the table and set a vase of flowers in front of it, as if beauty could hide the weight of suspicion. But my gaze always found it again, peeking out from behind stems and petals, demanding to be seen. At night, when the house grew too quiet, I would sit in the dark and trace the outline of the envelope with my fingers. It was only paper, ink, nothing more. And yet it felt heavier than stone. Donald's photo hung on the wall across from me, his smile steady, his eyes kind. I wondered what he would have said, whether he would have told me to burn the letter or to believe it. I could not decide. So the envelope stayed. Always in sight, always within reach, pulsing with a truth I was too afraid to confirm and too cautious to ignore. It became more than a letter. It became a companion of sorts, silent, sharp, and unrelenting, sitting across from me every time I tried to tell myself that my world was still whole. The morning I finally forced myself out of the house, the air carried the sharp edge of salt and wood smoke. I thought a walk through town might settle my mind, remind me that life was still steady, that people went on about their days with baskets of groceries and greetings at shop doors. But the town didn't feel the same. It felt as though the ground itself carried whispers. At the market, Mrs. Thompson at the bakery greeted me with her usual warmth, but there was a flicker, too quick to name, in her eyes before she smiled. At the grocer's, two women paused their conversation when I stepped down the aisle, their voices dropping to a hush. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was dragging shadows from the letter into the daylight. But the feeling clung to me, sticky and unshakable. I bought apples, a loaf of bread, and tried to pretend that nothing was different. Still, I noticed details I might have ignored before. The way the postman glanced at me a moment too long, the way the young clerk at the pharmacy offered help I hadn't asked for, his tone careful, as though he knew something I didn't. When I turned onto Main Street, a man I didn't recognize stepped out of the cafe. He was tall, neatly dressed, carrying a folder under one arm. Our eyes met for just a second. There was no nod, no greeting, only a spark of recognition. Or was it calculation, before he walked quickly the other way? I stopped in my tracks, my heart knocking hard against my ribs. He looked like someone with purpose, not a wanderer, not a stranger passing through. For a breathless moment, I was certain he knew my name without me ever speaking it. I stood there, clutching the paper bag with my bread, watching him disappear down the street. The gulls cried overhead, but even their familiar sound felt sharper, like it was cutting through the air rather than filling it. By the time I reached home, the bread was crushed slightly in my hand. I set it on the counter and leaned against the sink, staring out the window toward the harbour. The world outside still looked ordinary, boats rocking gently, children running along the shore path, but the town no longer felt like mine. The letter had already changed my home. Now it seemed to have changed the streets as well. Every glance, every whisper, every stranger's eyes made me wonder just how much of this was still my life and how much of it was already slipping away. The phone rang just after dusk, its sudden trill cutting through the quiet like a blade. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my chest tighten. Claire Holloway. For a moment, I almost let it ring out, afraid of what her voice might confirm, but habit and hope made me pick up. "Hello, Claire," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hi, Mom," she answered. polite, measured, as though we were acquaintances instead of mother and daughter. It had been weeks since her last call, and still she sounded as if she were ticking off an obligation. We spoke in fragments. She asked how I was. I told her about the weather, about the gulls that had returned early to the harbour. She hummed politely, the sound of someone listening without truly hearing. My fingers tapped the edge of the table where the envelope still lay, hidden now under a folded towel, though I could feel its weight pressing through. Then her voice shifted, cooler, purposeful. Mom, I wanted to ask if you'd thought any more about downsizing. You know, the house must be a lot to keep up with on your own. I froze, the silence between us growing thick. Downsizing, selling. My stomach turned cold. She continued as if rehearsed. Brian and I were talking about how valuable that property is. Houses near the harbour don't stay on the market long. It could give you freedom, less stress. And it might be the right time. The words fell like stones, heavy, deliberate. My throat tightened, but I managed to speak. Claire Holloway, are you suggesting I sell the house your father and I built our life in? Her tone softened only slightly. I'm just saying. Think about it. You don't need all that space. It's practical, that's all. Practical. The word burned. For her, my memories, my marriage, my entire history here could be reduced to square footage and market value. I could hear Brian's influence in every syllable. I told her I would think about it, though every fibre in me screamed otherwise. We said goodbye with the same politeness we started with. No warmth, no laughter, no promise of seeing each other soon. Just words hung in the air, brittle and unfinished. When I hung up, the house felt even quieter than before, as if the walls themselves had heard and recoiled. I lifted the towel and looked again at the envelope. The letter's warning and Claire's words now fit together like pieces of the same puzzle. And for the first time, I could no longer pretend that it wasn't real. It was late at night when sleep refused to come. I sat at the desk in the corner of the living room, the glow of the computer screen casting pale light across the walls. I told myself I was only going to check the news, maybe look up recipes, anything to distract my mind from Claire Holloway's call. But a thought slid in quietly, insistent. What if I searched for my own address? My fingers hesitated above the keys, then began to type. The moment I pressed enter, my breath caught. There it was, staring back at me, my house, listed online. I clicked the link with shaking hands, and there, photo after photo, was the life I had built, stripped, rearranged, staged. The walls were bare, the photographs gone. The colours were muted, painted in those generic tones that real estate agents love, as if warmth and memory had been scrubbed away. My dining table, where Donald once carved the Sunday roast, had been set with pristine white dishes and a vase of lilies I had never owned. The living room shelves, usually crowded with books and framed moments, were empty, but for a few impersonal decorations. And then I saw it, my favourite chair, the one by the window, moved, angled differently. The indentation in the rug proved it had been dragged, placed for a photograph like some lifeless prop. Even the chowan plant I had shifted into the sunlight last week was still there in one corner, a living witness to the intrusion. I stared at each photo, my chest tightening. They had been inside my home. They had touched my things. They had taken what was mine and dressed it for strangers. Yet I had never signed a single paper, never agreed to a thing. For a moment, shock pinned me still. But then it gave way, rising hot and sharp into fury. My house, my memories, paraded online as though I had already been erased. Claire Holloway's cool suggestion about downsizing no longer sounded like concern. It was strategy. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. My hands trembled, my jaw clenched. I felt Donald's absence like a weight, but I also felt something else. A fire I had not known was still inside me. This was no longer a question of distance or misunderstanding. This was a battle for my very life as I knew it, and I would not go quietly. The phone sat heavy in my hand, Claire Holloway's number already glowing on the screen. My thumb hovered over the button, my heart pounding with words I wanted to hurl through the line. How dare she? How dare Brian? How dare anyone step into my home and strip it of the life I had built? The fury burned hot, demanding release, but just as quickly, something steadier rose to meet it. A voice inside me whispered, "Don't waste it. Don't give them the satisfaction of hearing you crack." I set the phone back down, the silence of the room wrapping itself around me like a cloak. Instead of calling, I pulled out a notepad from the drawer and uncapped a pen. Slowly, deliberately, I wrote the date at the top of the page. Beneath it, I listed everything I had seen, everything I had heard. Claire's call about downsizing, Ellen's mention of the man at the cafe, the stranger on Main Street with the folder under his arm. And now the photos, the staged soulless images of my home. Each word I wrote steadied me. The anger that had felt like fire in my chest began to cool into something sharper, something that could cut. I was no longer just a mother reeling from betrayal. I was a woman keeping record, laying down the proof of what had been done. If they thought I would stumble blindly into their plans, they were wrong. I went further, pulling old folders from the hall closet. Deeds, mortgage documents, insurance papers. Donald and I had always kept them neatly in order. I reviewed each one carefully, noting every signature, every clause. Nothing would be touched without my hand upon it. I made copies, sliding them into a separate envelope, tucking it into the locked drawer of my desk. The letter still sat on the table, its presence a wound I could not ignore. I slid it into a clear plastic sleeve and added it to my file. If this was to be a battle, I would not fight empty-handed. By the time midnight passed, the notepad was filled with notes and the kitchen table covered with stacks of paper. My anger had not vanished. It had transformed. Quiet revenge had taken its first breath. I would not scream. I would not plead. I would wait. I would watch. I would gather. When the moment came, I would not be the one caught unprepared. It was Ellen who found me the next morning, standing by the hedge with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She squinted at me over the line of damp sheets, the kind of look that cuts through polite greetings. "Margaret Holloway," she said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. A ghost would have been easier. Still, I walked closer, lowering my voice. "Ellen, can we sit a while?" We settled on her porch, 2 mugs of tea steaming between us. The harbour air carried the faint smell of salt and smoke, the kind of scent that belongs to old towns and old secrets. For a while I said nothing, until the words pressed out of me. I told her about the letter, about Claire's phone call, about the photos of my house, staged and listed without me. Ellen listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her hands still. When I finished, she sighed deeply, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I know that road," she said. "I've walked it myself." She told me about her younger sister years ago, when their parents died and left the family cottage to them both. At first, her sister had spoken of love, of memories, of keeping the place in honour of their parents. But slowly, words shifted into suggestions. Sell the cottage, split the money, start fresh. When Ellen resisted, her sister grew colder, more distant, until finally the papers arrived without her consent, her name forged, her voice erased. "It took me years to understand," Ellen said quietly. Love without respect is just entitlement wearing a prettier dress. I thought she loved me enough to protect what mattered to us, but what she really loved was control. Her words sank deep, heavier than the tea in my hand. Love and entitlement. How often had I confused the two when it came to Claire? How many times had I excused her silence, her distance, her clipped tone, because I believed love was enough? Ellen reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. Margaret, you can't stop people from showing you who they are, but you can choose what to do with it. Don't let them teach you to give away pieces of yourself. I sat there in the harbour air, the tea cooling between us, her words ringing truer than anything I had admitted to myself. For the first time, I realised the letter was not just a warning. It was a test. And perhaps, in some painful way, it was also a gift. The next morning, I woke with a restlessness that would not let me sit still. The letter, the photos, Ellen's story, they circled in my mind like gulls over the harbour refusing to land. I looked around my home, really looked, and saw not just rooms but layers of a life I had been clinging to without thought. Closets stuffed with things untouched for years, drawers that held papers from decades ago, shelves bowed under the weight of memories. Suddenly, I knew what I needed to do. I began in the hall closet, pulling out boxes one by one. Dust rose in small clouds as I set them on the dining table. Old tax records, bank statements, letters from relatives long gone. Some I kept, some I tore in half, feeding them into a shredder until the sound of grinding paper became its own rhythm. Each sheet destroyed felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders. Next came the bedroom. I opened drawers filled with clothes I hadn't worn in years, dresses that belonged to a younger version of me, shoes whose heels I would never balance on again. I held each piece in my hands, remembering weddings, holidays, Sunday afternoons that now lived only in memory. I folded some neatly back into place. The rest I placed in bags for donation. It was not just cleaning, it was reclaiming. Every decision, keep, discard, give away, was a declaration. This stays because it still serves me. This goes because I no longer need to carry it. In the living room, I dusted the shelves and studied the photographs. Donald's smile, Claire's laughter, family gatherings where the air seemed warmer. These I kept, though I rearranged them, choosing which moments I wanted in sight each day. Not every picture deserved the space it had once claimed. By afternoon, the house looked different, lighter somehow. The clutter was gone, the air clearer. I sat at the kitchen table, the piles of sorted papers around me, and realised I had not once felt despair. I felt power. The house was still mine. The walls still held my voice, my choices. And for the first time since that envelope appeared on my porch, I felt as though I was no longer just reacting to what was being done to me. I was acting. Piece by piece, room by room, I was taking myself back. By the end of that week, the house felt less like a burden and more like a fortress. Each room I had cleared gave me not only space but breath, as though I had been living under layers of dust I hadn't even seen. Yet the most important task still waited. The papers, the evidence, the pieces of my life that could not be left lying out on a table where anyone might stumble upon them. I gathered them carefully, the envelope with its single cruel sentence, the notepad filled with dates and notes, the stack of property deeds and insurance papers I had spread across the dining table. And then, one more addition. A fresh document, freshly signed, freshly notarized. A new will. It had taken all my strength to sit in the office at the lawyer's, to listen as he explained my options in a voice both patient and neutral. I had signed slowly, deliberately, my hand steady on the page. I did not share the details with anyone, not even Ellen. The will was mine alone, a quiet shield forged in ink and paper. Back home, I brought everything to the desk in the living room. The drawer was small, unremarkable, but it had a key that clicked when turned, a sound that promised safety. I placed the letter first, sliding it into its plastic sleeve, then the notepad, its pages crowded with my handwriting, then the will folded neatly, tucked between protective covers. I closed the drawer gently, my palm resting against the smooth wood. For a moment I just stood there, the key cold in my hand. And then I turned it. The lock clicked into place, sharp and final. The sound filled me with a strange, quiet power. For weeks I had felt like everything was slipping from my grasp, my daughter, my home, even my sense of certainty. But now, for the first time, I felt the balance shift. I was no longer exposed. I was no longer the one waiting for the next blow. I slipped the key onto a thin chain and fastened it around my neck. It lay against my skin, a secret only I carried. I could feel its weight with every breath, a reminder that I still had choices, that I still held control. I walked through the house afterward, each step steadier, each room somehow more mine than before. The storm had not passed, but I was no longer standing in the open. I had built myself a shelter, and inside it, I was ready. The idea came to me in the quiet, while I was stirring a pot of soup one evening. The spoon moved slowly through the broth, round and round, as my mind circled just as endlessly around the same thoughts. What was mine? What was slipping? What I refused to lose? And then it struck me. If whispers were moving through the town, if strangers already seemed to know pieces of my story, then why not give them a story of my own making? Why not reclaim the voice that had been taken from me? I wiped my hands on a towel, sat at the kitchen table and pulled my notepad toward me. Across the top of a fresh page, I wrote 2 words in capital letters: community gathering. It looked simple enough, but I knew it was more than that. It was my chance to step back into the center of my own life, not in anger, not in confrontation, but in presence. The town hall was perfect, modest, familiar, a place where no one could accuse me of grandstanding. I pictured neighbors, families, children, cookies and tea, maybe lemonade if the weather held. Something warm and open, something that would look ordinary, but would carry weight in ways only I would fully understand. I jotted down details, invitations to old colleagues from the library, to members of the council, to the parents I used to see at story hour. Ellen would help, of course, and Patty too. Their presence alone would anchor me. And yes, Claire and Brian. Their names I wrote slowly, the letters pressed hard into the paper. They would receive their envelopes like everyone else, plain and unassuming. No hint of what they might hear inside those walls. The plan was not about revenge, not in the way people think of shouting matches or slammed doors. It was about quiet clarity, about making it known that I was not a woman to be erased, that my choices were still mine to make. As the soup simmered, the house around me felt less heavy. The letter in the locked drawer remained silent, but it no longer defined the air I breathed. I had something else now: momentum, purpose. I looked out the window at the harbour lights flickering across the water. For so long I had imagined myself as a figure left behind, watching others move on without me. But not anymore. This gathering, small as it would seem, would be my declaration. I would not confront. I would not accuse. I would simply stand steady and unshaken, and let the truth speak for itself. The next morning I cleared a space on the dining table and laid out a stack of cream-coloured envelopes. They looked harmless, almost quaint, but I knew the weight they carried. Each one was a thread weaving together the fabric of what would soon be my gathering. I wanted them to look personal, handwritten, not like official notices, but like small invitations from a neighbour, from a friend, something that could not be dismissed. I sharpened a pen and began. Ellen, of course. Her steady presence was a comfort. Patty and her husband, who had known me since Donald was alive. A few parents from the library, who still remembered the way I used to read aloud to their children. Members of the town council who liked to be seen supporting community initiatives. One by one, the names filled the list, and each envelope grew heavier in my hand once sealed. And then, the harder part. Claire. I paused when I wrote her name, pressing the pen into the paper until the ink bled slightly. Her address came easily, though the thought of her opening the envelope made my hand tremble. Still, I wrote it carefully, deliberately, not a single letter rushed. This was not an invitation to reconcile, not a plea for love. It was a summons of another kind, a reminder that she could not so easily erase me from my own life. Brian's name followed. Short, sharp strokes on the page. His presence would matter less to me, but still it was necessary. If they were plotting quietly, if they believed I would remain silent, then this gathering would break that illusion. When the last envelope was sealed, I placed the stack in a neat pile and slid it into a canvas bag. The weight surprised me, heavier than paper had any right to feel. At the post office, I handed them over one by one, watching the clerk's hand stamp each with finality. The sound echoed in my ears. Thud, 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 like a drumbeat, like the pulse of something alive. Walking back through town, I felt the shift in myself. For weeks I had been reacting, absorbing, bracing. Now I was moving forward, pushing the first stone that would set the others rolling. No matter what whispers spread, no matter what plans Claire or Brian thought they would not be able to ignore this. The invitations were out, the date was set. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not just like a woman surviving, but a woman preparing to be seen. The morning of the event dawned crisp and clear, the kind of air that makes you feel both fragile and alive. I dressed simply, navy slacks, a soft sweater, and carried a box to the car. Inside were the small details that mattered: the cookies from the bakery, a folder of documents, a vase of tulips I had bought at the market. They were not decorations so much as anchors, things that reminded me of who I was and what I had chosen. When I arrived at the town hall, Patty was already there, bustling about with a tray of cups and a smile that steadied me. Ellen came soon after, her arms full of folded tablecloths. Together we arranged the tables, set out the chairs, placed the tulips where the light could catch them. Slowly, the room began to look less like a municipal building and more like a gathering place, something warm and human. By the time the first guests arrived, the air was alive with the sound of conversation. Children ran their fingers along the spines of books stacked neatly at the side, their voices hesitant as they prepared to read aloud. Neighbours greeted one another with easy familiarity, filling the hall with a sense of community I had almost forgotten was possible. I moved among them, smiling, shaking hands, listening. My heart thudded when I saw Claire and Brian step through the doorway. She wore a polite smile, guarded and thin, while he hovered at her shoulder, his eyes scanning the room. I gave them the same calm nod I offered everyone else. No more, no less. When the children began to read, the room softened into quiet. Their voices stumbled at first, then grew stronger, their small triumphs greeted with gentle applause. Watching them, I felt the certainty settle inside me. This was the moment I had been walking toward. When the last child sat down, I stepped forward. My hands rested lightly on the folder, but my voice was steady. I thanked everyone for coming, for supporting one another, for believing in the simple but powerful act of community. And then I said the words I had carried for weeks. I told them I was establishing a fund, drawn from my own savings, my estate, my life. A fund dedicated to children's literacy, to technology access, to the future of the town. I did not mention betrayal or whispers, or the letter locked in my drawer. I did not need to. The meaning hung in the air all the same. Applause rose, warm and unforced. Faces glowed with something I had not felt in so long: recognition, respect. The room buzzed again with conversation, children hurried back to their books, and for the first time in months, I felt entirely in control of the story of my life. As the applause rolled through the hall like a slow, rising tide, I let my eyes sweep over the crowd. Familiar faces glowed with warmth, neighbours leaning forward, old colleagues nodding with quiet approval. Children tugging at their parents' sleeves with bright eyes. For a moment the sound and the light wrapped around me, and I felt lifted, held by something larger than myself. And then, in the back of the room, I saw her. Claire. My daughter stood stiff, her arms folded across her chest as if to hold herself together. Her smile was gone, replaced by a flat, unreadable mask. But I knew that look. I had seen it when she was a child caught in a lie, when defiance had hardened into a shield. Beside her, Brian's jaw clenched so tightly I thought I could hear the grind of his teeth from where I stood. His gaze darted toward the exit, then back at me, as though calculating whether to walk out or stay, whether leaving would make them look weaker or stronger. For a fleeting second, my heart wanted to falter, wanted to shrink back into the woman who had always bent for peace, who had always yielded rather than risk open fracture. But then another sound rose, the applause still rolling, still steady, drowning out the silence between me and them. It washed over me, louder than Claire's coldness, louder than Brian's tension, louder than the fear that had lived in me for months. I smiled, not at them, not for them, but for myself. For the people who had come not to strip something away but to share in something being built. Ellen caught my eye across the room, her expression soft but fierce, a kind of nod that said, "Stand tall, don't you dare shrink." Patty hovered near the refreshments, her face bright with tears she didn't bother to hide. I let myself breathe, really breathe. For once I was not invisible, not a shadow at the edges of my daughter's life, not a silent woman waiting to see what would be taken next. Here in this hall, I was the centre of something real. Claire and Brian stood in the shadows, their unease thick and sharp. But the room did not belong to them. It belonged to me, to the children flipping through books, to the neighbours leaning close with gratitude in their eyes. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever came next, I had stepped out of their grasp. I had claimed my place in the light. The days after the gathering felt like the calm that follows a long storm. The town moved with a quieter rhythm, and yet, whenever I walked down Main Street, there were glances, smiles, even words of thanks. At the grocery store, a man I barely knew stopped me by the apples just to say he admired what I had done. At the post office, a young mother with 2 children tugging at her coat told me she had already signed up for the new reading program. Their words were brief, but each carried weight, as though my choice had shifted something in the air we all shared. From Claire, however, there was only silence. No phone call, no visit. The absence was loud, a hollow drumbeat at the edges of my days. I told myself not to wait for her, not to hang my peace on the hook of her approval. But a mother's heart is stubborn. Even when bruised, even when tired, it listens for the smallest sign of return. It came one afternoon in the form of a plain white envelope, slipped into my mailbox. The handwriting was hers, sharp, deliberate, as though every letter had been carved into the paper. My breath caught when I saw it, my hands trembling before I even tore the flap. Inside was a single sheet. The words were few. She wrote that she had heard about the fund, that it was my money to do with as I pleased. No mention of betrayal, no mention of the staged photographs of my house, or the whispers around town. No acknowledgement of what she had done or what I had endured. Only at the very end, a single line, "I hope you find what you are looking for." That was all. Cold, polished, distant. I folded the letter carefully, my chest tight with something I could not quite name. Anger, sorrow, resignation. I placed it in the drawer where I keep other correspondence, the kind that matters enough to keep, but not enough to display. It did not deserve a frame, did not deserve a place on the mantel. It belonged among the quiet records of what had passed between us. That night, as the wind pressed against the windows and the house settled into its creaks, I sat in the lamplight with a book on my lap. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It was not an open wound anymore, but a line drawn clearly between us. She had chosen her distance. I had chosen my peace. And for the first time, I understood that those 2 truths could exist side by side, even if they never met again. The weeks that followed carried a rhythm I had not known in years. It was as if the air itself had changed, less heavy, less sharp. Each day seemed to bring some small sign that what I had set in motion was already taking root. One morning, Patty brought over a small wooden box she insisted I keep on my desk. "For the notes," she said, placing it gently beside my lamp. I didn't know what she meant until the first envelopes began to arrive. Thank you notes, written in round, uneven handwriting, the kind only children can make. Some had crayon drawings tucked inside, bright suns and stick figures holding books. Others were simple, just a few words. "Thank you for the stories," or "I like reading now." Each one I placed carefully into the box, as though storing away proof that my choice mattered. When I walked through town, people greeted me differently, not just with polite nods, but with warmth, with recognition. The grocer asked about the next reading session. The librarian waved me over to share that the computers purchased through the fund were already in use. Even the mayor stopped me outside the bakery to say that the council was discussing ways to expand the programme. Their voices carried respect, not pity, not politeness, but respect. It was a weight I wore gladly. Inside my own home, the atmosphere shifted too. Rooms that had once felt haunted by tension now felt lighter, less cluttered with old echoes. I opened windows more often, let the sea air sweep through. I cooked for myself without rushing, brewed tea in the afternoons just because I wanted to. Even the old chowan plant in the window seemed to thrive, its leaves stretching wider, greener. I no longer waited for the phone to ring, no longer measured my days by Claire's absence. Instead, I marked time by letters arriving, by children's laughter echoing from the library steps, by the quiet hum of a community that now felt closer than blood. At night, I slept more soundly. When the house creaked, it no longer startled me. It was simply the sound of wood settling, of walls holding. I found myself breathing more deeply, smiling without reason. The fund was growing not just in numbers, but in spirit. It had become more than money. It was a bridge, a light, a way forward. And with each passing day, I felt steadier, as though I had finally stepped into a rhythm that belonged wholly to me. For the first time in so long, my life no longer felt like something unraveling. It felt like something being rebuilt piece by piece, stronger, lighter, mine. The seasons turned softly, almost without my noticing. Winter loosened its grip, spring pressed through the soil, and I found myself walking by the harbour most mornings, not because I was waiting for anything, but simply because I wanted to breathe. The water shimmered in silver tones, the gulls moved low and easy, and I realised that the rhythm of the tide had become the rhythm of my days, steady, faithful, unbothered by storms that had already passed. There are still moments when Claire drifts into my mind. A memory of her laughter when she was small, the way her hand used to fit so easily into mine. I do not deny those moments. I hold them tenderly, as one might hold a seashell worn smooth by time, but I no longer confuse the memory of love with the entitlement of what she tried to take. That is the painful difference I had to learn, that family can be both our greatest comfort and our sharpest wound. Dignity, I learned, is not something handed to you by those you love. It is not earned through their approval or their forgiveness or even their presence. Dignity is a choice you make in silence, in stillness, when no one is watching. It is the moment you decide that your worth will not be defined by betrayal or absence. For me, that choice took the shape of an envelope once left on my porch, an envelope that might have destroyed me if I had let it. Instead, I turned it into a beginning, into a fund, into something larger than bitterness. I redirected what was meant to diminish me into something that built others. And in doing so, I built myself anew. When people in town thank me now, I smile, but inside I think, this was never just about books or programs or money. It was about choosing to live on my own terms, to reclaim the story that was slipping from my hands. I did not lose a daughter. That is what I once feared, but it is not the truth. What I lost was the illusion that love must always mean sacrifice, that being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left. What I found was something harder, something quieter, but far more lasting. I found myself again. And if there is one truth I would leave behind, one line I hope will echo after my voice fades, it is this: sometimes the peace we keep is worth more than the love we lose. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.